Please, just one step." The words were soft, almost fragile, and they floated across the rose-filled garden like a desperate wish carried on the evening breeze. They belonged to Lily Sterling, the 12-year-old daughter of billionaire Richard Sterling, a man whose name carried weight in every boardroom in America. But here, in the privacy of his sprawling estate, there was no boardroom, no empire, just a young girl in a wheelchair, staring at her useless legs as if they were her prison bars. Lily hadn't always been this way. Just 3 years earlier, she had been a dancer, light on her feet, spinning through the halls of the Sterling mansion with music in her heart. But a tragic car accident had taken all of that from her, leaving her paralyzed from the waist down. Since then, her once vibrant laughter had faded into silence. She barely spoke anymore, rarely smiled, and often sat by the window watching other children play from a distance. That evening, twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the garden glowing like something out of a fairy tale. But inside the mansion, Richard's voice echoed with tension as he barked into his phone about shipping contracts and deadlines. Money flowed into his accounts faster than he could count, but none of it mattered, not when his daughter's spirit was slipping further away each day. Then, something unexpected broke the silence. Through the open gates of the garden came a boy, barefoot, his hair wild, his shirt torn at the sleeves. He couldn't have been older than 14, but life had already carved struggle into his face. His name was Noah, though Lily didn't know that yet. He was homeless, surviving on scraps and kindness when he could find it. For weeks, he had been sleeping in the nearby park, unnoticed by most of the world. But Noah carried something the world hadn't stolen from him, a love for dance. As the crickets began to chirp, Noah stepped onto the stone tiles of the garden gazebo. His feet slapped against the cool marble, his arms stretched out as if he were commanding the air itself. He twirled, stumbled, then laughed at himself before trying again. His movements weren't perfect, not the way Lily remembered the polished dancers she once watched on stage, but there was something pure about them. And then it happened. Lily laughed. It wasn't forced. It wasn't polite. It was real, bubbling out of her chest in a way it hadn't in years. She clapped her hands, urging him on. Noah grinned, spinning faster, balancing on one foot before collapsing into a goofy bow. Lily's laughter rang out again, filling the empty garden with something it hadn't heard in far too long, joy. For that brief moment, Lily forgot the weight of her chair, forgot the pain of her accident. She didn't feel broken, she felt alive. And as the last rays of sun dipped below the horizon, neither Lily nor Noah noticed the shadow standing in the French doors of the mansion. Richard Sterling was watching, and what he saw both startled and unsettled him. Richard Sterling was a man used to control. Every deal, every contract, every aspect of his billion-dollar empire bent to his will. People either respected him or feared him, and he preferred it that way. But nothing in his world, no amount of money, no number of connections, had been able to control the cruel reality of his daughter's condition. It ate at him daily, the way her small frame slumped in that wheelchair, her eyes hollow, her laughter absent. So when Richard stepped out onto the terrace that evening and saw her laughing, he stopped dead in his tracks. For a heartbeat, he couldn't breathe. The sound was so rare, so unexpected, that he almost believed he was dreaming. But then his sharp eyes fell on the boy, a ragged, barefoot child, spinning clumsily in his manicured garden, his dirty toes smudging the polished stone tiles of the gazebo. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dust, and his dark hair stuck up in wild tufts. He didn't belong here. He wasn't family. He wasn't staff. He was an intruder. What is going on here? Richard's voice thundered like a storm, breaking the fragile moment. The laughter died instantly. Lily's hands froze mid-clap, her smile vanishing as quickly as it had come. Noah stumbled mid-spin, nearly falling before catching himself, his wide eyes snapping to the tall figure framed by the French doors. He didn't run. He could have. Most kids in his position would have bolted at the sight of the mansion's owner. But Noah stood rooted in place, his chest heaving, his feet still bare on the cold stone. "Daddy, wait!" Lily cried, wheeling herself forward. Her small hands gripped the rims of her chair, as if trying to shield Noah with her own body. "He's not dangerous. He's my friend." Richard's brows knitted together, his jaw tight. "Friend? Lily, this boy trespassed on our property." He could be anyone. He could be dangerous. Noah swallowed hard, his throat dry. For a moment, he thought of staying silent. But then he glanced at Lily's pleading eyes, and he found his voice. "I didn't mean no harm, sir," he said, his voice rough, carrying both fear and determination. I just wanted to make her smile." The words hit Richard like a slap. He clenched his fists at his sides, torn between anger and something else he couldn't name. He had hired the best doctors, the most expensive therapists, even built a private rehabilitation wing in the mansion, all of it to give his daughter a chance to heal. And still, she never laughed. Yet this boy, this homeless, unwanted boy, had done what millions of dollars could not. Still, his protective instincts flared. He turned to his staff hovering inside the house. "Call security," he barked. "No." Lily's voice cracked like glass. She wheeled forward until she was right at the edge of the gazebo, tears springing to her eyes. "If you make him leave, I'll never forgive you." The words hung heavy in the air. For years, Richard had watched his daughter slip into silence, unable to fight for anything. But now, for the first time, she was pleading, fighting, not for herself, but for this boy. Richard's chest tightened. He had never felt so conflicted. The billionaire was standing at a crossroads, staring at a barefoot boy and a daughter who had finally found her voice. And for the first time in his life, Richard Sterling didn't know what to do. The silence that followed Lily's words was heavier than stone. Even the birds in the garden seemed to hush, waiting to see what Richard Sterling would do next. His jaw worked, his fists clenched, and for a moment, Noah thought he might be dragged out by his collar and tossed into the street. But then Richard's gaze shifted. He looked at his daughter, not at her wheelchair, not at her weak legs, but at the fire in her eyes. It had been years since he'd seen her that alive. Richard's voice softened, though his tone still carried authority. "Show me," he said. Noah frowned, unsure he'd heard correctly. "Show you what?" "Show me what you were doing," Richard replied, gesturing at the gazebo floor. "The dance. Show me why my daughter would risk defying me for you." Lily clapped her hands together eagerly. "Yes, Noah. Please, show him." The boy hesitated. His body screamed with nervousness, but Lily's encouragement lit a spark of courage. Slowly, he stepped back into the center of the gazebo. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and let the music in his mind take over. Barefoot and trembling, Noah began to move. His steps were clumsy at first, but soon, his body flowed with rhythm. He spun, leapt, stomped against the marble, his arms slicing the air with raw energy. There was no polish, no training, just pure, unfiltered joy. Each move was a story of hunger, of nights spent under bridges, of dreaming despite despair. Richard's stern expression faltered. Something about the boy's movements struck deep inside him, something money could never touch. Then, the miracle happened. Lily, who had barely moved her legs in years, gripped the armrests of her wheelchair. With trembling determination, she pushed herself up, just slightly, her body shaking from the effort. Her knees wobbled, her weight leaned heavily on the chair, but she lifted. She wasn't standing fully, but she was higher than she'd been in months. Her arms rose into the air, mimicking Noah's movements. Her fingers twirled, her wrists bent gracefully, and she laughed, a laugh filled with light. Richard's heart nearly stopped. His throat tightened as he watched his daughter moving, dancing in spirit with the homeless boy before her. "Look, Daddy," Lily cried, her face glowing. "I'm dancing again." Tears burned in Richard's eyes, tears he would never let his business rivals see. The staff standing in the shadows exchanged stunned looks, unsure whether they were witnessing a dream or reality. Noah finished his routine with a clumsy bow, his chest heaving from exertion. Lily clapped wildly, her smile brighter than the sun. "You see, Daddy? He makes me want to move. He makes me feel like I can." For the first time in years, Richard Sterling felt powerless and strangely grateful for it. He saw what no doctor, no therapy, no fortune could buy, the spark of hope inside his daughter's eyes. And all of it had come from a barefoot boy who had nothing but a gift for dance. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed from inside the mansion. 2 uniformed security guards burst into the garden, their radios crackling. Their eyes immediately locked onto Noah, the barefoot boy who looked like he didn't belong within 100 miles of a billionaire's estate. "Sir, do you want us to remove him?" one guard asked, already stepping forward. Noah's stomach dropped. He'd seen this before. Cops, guards, store managers with suspicious eyes. He knew what came next. Being dragged away, treated like garbage, forgotten all over again. He braced himself for the rough grip on his arm. But then Richard's voice cut through the air. "Stop." The guards froze. Richard lifted a hand, his gaze still fixed on Noah. For a long moment, no one moved. Even Lily, perched at the edge of her wheelchair, held her breath. Richard stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the marble tiles. His towering frame loomed over Noah, who stood with his shoulders tense and chin raised in quiet defiance. He wasn't going to beg. Not this time. But instead of shouting or demanding answers, Richard did something no one expected. He extended his hand. "You gave my daughter something I couldn't," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than any business speech he had ever delivered. "Hope. For that, I owe you more than I can repay." Noah blinked, staring at the billionaire's outstretched hand as though it were a trick. Slowly, uncertainly, he reached out. His small, calloused hand slid into Richard's, dwarfed by the man's powerful grip. Lily gasped, her face lighting up. "Daddy, does that mean?" Richard glanced down at her, then back at Noah. "You're not leaving," he said firmly. "From this day forward, you'll stay here. You'll be Lily's dance partner, her friend, and I'll make sure you never go hungry or sleep in the streets again." Noah's lips parted in shock. His voice came out rough, almost breaking. "Sir, I don't want your money. He swallowed hard. "I just like making people smile." For the first time in years, Richard Sterling laughed. Not the cold, businesslike chuckle he used at board meetings, but a genuine laugh. He squeezed Noah's shoulder. "Then that's exactly why you belong here." The guards looked at each other, bewildered. Servants peered from the windows, whispering. The billionaire who rarely trusted anyone had just welcomed a homeless boy into his mansion as if he were family. Lily clapped her hands and wheeled forward, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. "Thank you, Daddy. Thank you so much." Richard knelt down beside his daughter, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Anything that makes you smile like that, Lily, is worth more than all the money I'll ever make." And with those words, Richard Sterling, the man known for his iron grip on power and wealth, had made the most shocking move of his life. He had opened his heart. The following days brought a kind of change the Sterling mansion hadn't seen in years. For so long, the estate had been a quiet, almost lifeless place, grand in size but hollow in spirit. Staff moved silently. Richard buried himself in business, and Lily spent her days staring out of windows or sitting silently in therapy sessions that felt more like obligations than hope. But then Noah came. Every morning, he would meet Lily in the garden. He didn't bring medicine or exercises from doctors. He brought music. Sometimes he hummed a tune he'd picked up on the streets. Other times he clapped rhythms with his hands. And occasionally he convinced a housemaid to play songs through the old speaker system by the gazebo. Wherever the music came from, Noah's dancing followed. Awkward, energetic, full of life. And Lily responded. At first, it was just her hands, twirling in the air to mimic his movements. Then her arms stretched wider, her torso swaying to match his rhythm. And soon, with Noah cheering her on, she began to lift herself higher from her chair each day, her legs trembling but moving, little by little. The doctors, summoned back by Richard, were stunned. They admitted that progress in physical therapy often came slowly, but what they were witnessing wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Lily wasn't forcing herself through exercises anymore. She wanted to move. She wanted to dance. And joy, they realized, was medicine all on its own. For Noah, life transformed in ways he never imagined. For the first time, he had a bed of his own, warm meals, and clothes that weren't worn thin by years of hardship. Richard enrolled him in school, insisting the boy had potential far beyond what his circumstances had allowed. Yet even as his world expanded with new opportunities, Noah never stopped showing up in the garden for Lily. She wasn't just his friend, she was his anchor, the reason he felt he finally belonged somewhere. One evening, Richard stood at the edge of the garden, arms folded as he watched his daughter and Noah spinning in their own worlds of laughter. Lily's cheeks were flushed, her hair flying as she raised her arms like a ballerina, while Noah stomped and twirled in his usual clumsy but joyful way. The billionaire felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't known since his wife had passed years ago. For the first time in so long, his house wasn't quiet. It was alive. "Daddy," Lily called out, her voice carrying through the twilight. "Come join us." Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't dance." But Noah grinned. "Everyone can dance, sir. You just gotta let go." Something in those words stirred him. For decades, Richard had built walls. Walls of power, wealth, and pride. But tonight, with his daughter laughing and a boy who had once been invisible to the world inviting him in, Richard let one of those walls fall. Slowly, almost awkwardly, he stepped onto the marble floor. He didn't spin or twirl, but he swayed, just enough to make Lily squeal with joy. And in that moment, Richard Sterling realized something he had chased his whole life, but never truly found: happiness. The billionaire who once believed money was the greatest power now knew the truth. Real power was giving someone else a chance. And it all began the night he caught a homeless boy dancing with his paralyzed daughter.